The Parthian Empire once stood as Rome's fiercest nemesis. Its reputation is often defined by their deadly horse archers, who gave their name to the infamous Parthian Shot, and by the heavily armored cataphracts, so vividly described by ancient historians. For a detailed look at just what these units were capable of, be sure to watch the Battle of Carrhae by History March through the link in the description, with whom we have collaborated to analyze these mysterious Parthian armies and explore how they managed to annihilate many a Roman legion. Unfortunately, beyond cataphracts and horse archers, very little is known about Parthia's military organization, structure, and manpower. But thanks to the efforts of many modern historians, we are finally able to unmask this long-lost mystery and present to you how the Parthian Empire geared for war. To understand the structure of the Parthian army is to understand the very structure of their empire itself. It began when the nomadic East Iranian Parni tribe invaded the Seleucid province of Parthia, and would come to adopt both its name and language. Over the next century, they expanded into the weakening empire, even capturing its capital of Seleucia, and coalescing into a mighty empire themselves. In doing so, they incorporated many of the existing Achaemenid and Hellenistic administrative structures into their own nomadic traditions, which they never fully renounced. It was this mixing of cultures that gave birth to a unique fusion of warfare and statecraft that would define the Parthian Empire. At the pinnacle of power stood the king, who was always chosen from the royal Arsacid family. Every ruler adopted the name of Arsaces, deriving their legitimacy from the empire's founder, Arsaces I. This royal family consolidated its supreme power by owning the largest share of land in the form of royal estates. Interestingly, the very concept of a royal ruling family was deeply rooted in ancient nomadic tradition, and was present in many different tribes. A good example of this can even be observed centuries later in the Borjigin family of the Mongols, the royal clan from which Genghis Khan himself hailed. Directly beneath the royal Parthian family were the 7 great houses or clans of Parthia. These were the Zik, Karin, Mehran, Suren, Aspabad, Varoz, and Espandio. The most senior members of these houses were known as Hamerzan, who wielded vast power second only to the royal family and the highest royal officials. This high nobility formed the second major pillar of the administration, with each house owning vast private estates and extensive networks of minor vassals as their personal domains. In practice, this structure meant that governing the empire was a constant collaboration between the king and his 7 noble houses. These families, of course, competed for preeminence and powerful royal offices, all while trying to exclude their rivals from such positions. In a way, this dynamic is quite similar to the hostile and infamous Roman Senate, but with a critical distinction. Parthian nobles were far less centralized, and maintained powerful personal retinues loyal only to them. This created a far more volatile political environment, where the sudden death of a king without a clear successor carried a significant risk of power vacuums, with the noble houses potentially breaking off into supporting different candidates for the throne. Overseeing this entire delicate structure was the royal administration, loyal only to the king. And much like in the preceding Achaemenid and Seleucid empires, it had a dual role. First, it supervised all royal estates and vassals, and secondly, it governed the empire's provinces, which retained a degree of local autonomy. The senior-most official in this provincial system was the Shahrab, who governed over an entire province of the empire. Within each province, individual districts were managed by a deshpat, and beneath them were the lowest-ranking royal officers, the harkpat. each commanding a major city or fortress. Crucially, all these royal administrative officials were drawn from the Parthian noble houses or their clients, who ruled in conjunction with local aristocracies, constantly balancing royal and local interests. The final element of Parthian governance was its network of client states, typically located on the empire's borders. They were ruled either by their own local royal dynasties as puppet kings, or by members of the royal Parthian Arsacid family. According to Roman sources, during the period of Parthia's greatest territorial expansion, there were no fewer than 18 of such client kings. Now let's take a look at the army and military might of this colossal entity. Writing in the early 3rd century AD, towards the end of the Parthian Empire, the Roman historian Herodian observes that the Parthians didn't rely on mercenaries, nor in an organized army. This bold claim was not entirely wrong. While the Roman Empire fielded a standing army of about 300,000 soldiers at all times, the standing Parthian army only numbered around 20 to 50,000 men. Of these, 10,000 were the elite royal guard, made of the king's own bodyguards and specialized units drawn from the Parthian nobility. But the rest of them were scattered across the empire into small garrisons and retinues, commanded by local satraps and minor royal officials. From this, we can understand why Herodian assumed the Parthians had no real army, but what he failed to grasp was the immense mobilization system behind this modest facade. In times of war, all royal officials were tasked with quickly conscripting warriors from their regions to massively bolster the royal army. This manpower came from 3 major sources. First, the landowners of the vast royal estates. Second, the 7 great noble households with their personal retinues and bound vassals. And third, the broader class of minor nobles and aristocrats from the lower branches of the great houses. From these 3 sources, Parthian kings seemed to have no problem fielding large armies, and the vassal kingdoms would only add to their numbers. Phraates IV fielded 50,000 good quality horsemen in 36 AD to face off against Mark Antony, while in 69 AD, Vologenes I offered Vespasian 40,000 horse archers for his vie for the Roman throne. And both these figures pale in comparison to the army Vologenes V mustered to quell a rebellion in Media and Persis in 197 AD, numbering 120,000 men. But modern historians believe that even these figures are far from the limit, and estimate the manpower of different Parthian regions based on levels of prosperity, population density, and martial prowess. Key provinces like Mesopotamia and Parthia, or large vassal states like Media Atropatene, could call to arms 50, 40, and 20,000 horsemen respectively. Other regions like Persis or Media, with their long infantry tradition, could supply both cavalry and infantry, though the Parthians had little use for infantry on campaign, reserving them instead mostly for sieges and garrison duty. Smaller or less prosperous provinces like Ariana, Margiana, or Sakastan would in turn provide less soldiers, about 10,000 for the first 2 and 15,000 for the latter. Using all these figures, and by combining Achaemenid and Sassanid mobilization figures, historians have proposed that the Parthian kings could mobilize a maximum of up to 295,000 men for war between the 2nd and 3rd centuries AD. Of these, at least 155,000 would be their notorious cavalrymen. The core of these horsemen were the famed heavy shock cavalry known as asparon, or cataphracts, who were formed by a special class called azot. Much like Western medieval knights, the azot took pride in their status as warriors, and their wealth varied just as considerably. The poorest of them could still afford high-quality armor for themselves and their horses, while the richest not only equipped themselves in the best available armor for the time, but also dozens of their best followers and retainers as well, who would also be among the class of Azot. Many of these knights would hold personal loyalty to their high nobles from the 7 houses, whom they followed into battle. On the other hand, all horse archers were drawn from the minor nobility and gentry, and would be the far more numerous branch of the cavalry, given the Parthians had a substantial number of minor nobles. The lowest of them, who might barely be able to afford a horse, still took pride in their nominal nobility, and the exclusive honor of serving as cavalry for their king, a right granted only to higher Parthian classes. The final element of the army were the forces raised by client kingdoms, like Armenia and Persis, who were bound to fight for the Parthian king. As you can see, in times of war, the Parthian army, known as Sepod, could grow from a skeleton crew of 10,000 to a formidable force numbering hundreds of thousands. Theoretically, its command rested on the king's shoulders, or in his absence, the prince heirs. But in practice, this role could also be delegated to the Sepodpat, or commander-in-chief of the army, who was chosen from one of the 7 major houses. All Parthian units, be it cavalry or infantry, were organized following a decimal system. The smallest tactical unit was the 100-man strong Vasht. 10 Vasht would in turn make a Drafsh, which numbered 1,000 men, and was organized around a dragon standard. Finally, 10 Drafsh would make a 10,000 strong Grund, the largest Parthian formation. This system was probably very similar to other nomadic formations. Now let's take a look at how a Parthian army would have looked in reality by analyzing Surena's army composition at the Battle of Carrhae in 53 BC. Plutarch describes Surena in the following manner. Nor was Surena an ordinary man at all, but in wealth, birth, and consideration he stood next to the king, while in valor and ability he was the foremost Parthian of his time, besides having no equal in stature and personal beauty. He used to travel on private business with a baggage train of 1,000 camels, and was followed by 200 wagons for his concubines, while 1,000 mail-clad horsemen and a still greater number of light-armed cavalry served as his escort, and had altogether, as horsemen, vassals, and slaves, no fewer than 10,000 men. Moreover, he enjoyed the ancient and hereditary privilege of being first to set the crown upon the head of the Parthian king. As the head of the house of Suren, which owned almost half of the province of Sakastan in estates, Surena had a large manpower pool at his disposal. The backbone of his 10,000-strong army would be Surena's Asparon Drafsh, made up of 1,000 of his personal retinue of Azot kinsmen and retainers, who were directly bound to him and the House of Suren, akin to knights serving their feudal lord. Consequently, Surena's Asparon Drafsh represented more than an elite cataphract unit. It was the embodiment of the military might of the House of Suren, who would go on to slaughter thousands of Crassus's legionaries at Carrhae. For his horse archers, as also the governor of Sakastan, Surena would count on the province's lesser nobility, its gentry, and the Saka settlers that inhabited Sakastan since the early 1st century BC, and were also bound to the Parthian king. Many Greco-Roman historians seem to have misunderstood the very foundations of the Parthian army and society. For example, the historian Justin writes about the Parthian army assembled by Phraates IV in the following manner. They have an army, not like other nations, of free men, but chiefly consisting of slaves, the numbers of whom daily increase, the power of manumission being allowed to none, and all their offspring in consequence being born slaves. These bondmen they bring up as carefully as their own children, and teach them with great pains the arts of riding and shooting with the bow. As anyone is eminent in wealth, so he furnishes the king with a proportionate number of horsemen for war, Indeed, when 50,000 cavalry encountered Marcus Antonius as he was making war upon Parthia, only 400 of them were free men. Whether by accident or on purpose, the Romans completely misinterpreted the Parthian system, paradoxically describing an army of life-bound slaves, who were nonetheless treated like family and entrusted as the empire's sole warriors. In truth, most of this army was composed of the lower nobility from vassal kingdoms, whose lifelong bond was not to slavery, but to the obligation to fight for the Parthian king when called upon. Meanwhile, the noted 400 free men almost certainly refers to the upper nobility who fought as cataphracts. While these levied men lacked large-scale unit training and drill, they compensated with mastery of the small-scale tactics central for their way of war. After all, cavalry service was mandatory for all Parthian nobles and gentry. Each trained from childhood in horsemanship, archery, and wielding the two-handed kontos lance used by cataphracts, alongside thorough instruction in swords, axes, and maces. As a result, commanders could rest assured that their recruits needed no further training for war. Ironically, it was Roman armies that predominantly recruited its rank and file from lower-class plebs. Although these men were citizens who joined by choice, they required extensive training to become combat-ready, while the Roman elite reserved itself almost exclusively for command and administrative roles. The large equestrian class below them did face social pressure to serve in the army, but most ended up pursuing careers as businessmen, administrators, or contractors, and were not subject to compulsory military conscription during wartime. In essence, Parthians had a more warlike culture than the Romans, yet a catastrophic military defeat in the field rarely crippled Rome's government and stability. While for Parthia, it could mean the death of the king and much of the nobility in a single day, triggering immediate political and economic turmoil. Ultimately, the Parthians, much like the Romans, were defeated more so by internal political instability than by military defeat. But ironically, this instability was exactly what made the Parthian military so formidable in the first place. Unlike Rome's salaried professional legions, the Parthian king maintained a large, well-trained, but dormant force at no constant cost, only quickly summoning it for defense or expansion, before disbanding it again. Yet this financial advantage created its own peril. It placed massive military power directly in the hands of the great noble houses, which could seriously undermine the king in periods of internal strife. This meant the king's greatest strength, a strong dormant army, was also his greatest vulnerability, which probably felt like the sword of Damocles permanently suspended above him. I really hope you enjoyed this rather niche topic. For a closer analysis of the Roman army, make sure to watch our other videos. A special thanks to our Patreons for always supporting us, and to History March for collaborating with us on this fascinating topic. Make sure to watch their video about Carrhae to witness the Parthian army in action. I hope to see you all in the next one.